Alright guys, BM here, back with more Mafia.
Which really makes me want a remake of the original game with the Part 2 engine. But after this, we do get our first bit.
I kept that in there, whatever, fuck it.
Our only bit of gameplay where we as Joel, which does take place entirely on horseback. And while that might be
yeah.
Should
I cut that out? I'm probably gonna just leave it in and say fuck it.
I mean, obviously, a lot of this game is very dark,
yeah.
brutal, and raw.
Listening to my Last Part 2 retrospective because I just wanted to rewatch it. Just kind of remember exactly what I said about it.
And after that, we cap off the prologue with us returning to Jackson, and through this, we get a great scene.
Was it through here?
And Ellie, which was a recreation of the epilogue from One Night Live, which was a musical about a year after the original game's release, where it did add this new scene to the story, and it's pretty much the exact same scene, word for word. Also uses the same song, Future Days by Pearl Jam, which is a perfect song to encapsulate the story of Joel and Ellie. And it's really beautifully performed here by Troy Baker as well. But through this, we still see two characters that stems from Joel's actions at the end of the previous game that do obviously play a major factor within the main storyline of the game. Now, after that cutscene, we do skip 4 years and start playing as Ellie right before she leaves to go on patrol. And the Waking Up chapter here introduces us to two of the new main characters in Ellie's storyline, Jesse and Mafia. You first meet Jesse, who is a fine character. I mean, I do feel like his dialogue is well written, well acted. He's a likable character, but he isn't really given much to do outside of just adding some awkwardness to Ellie and Tina's relationship and being a companion during certain chapters of the game. Now, most of the gameplay in this chapter revolves around following Jesse around the town. And we eventually meet up with Maria to find out our orders. And through this, we get a decent amount of exposition about Ellie's relationships with both Jesse and Tina. But we also do learn about the dance that happened the previous night, which is a cutscene that we had seen already at a previous E3. And I do question why the game takes so long to include that scene within the main game itself, as it isn't shown to the player until the end of the farm chapter. Which I get its narrative significance there in the fact that it's obviously still showing the guilt that Ellie has over her relationship with Joel, but I do still find the placement of it kind of strange. And really, that's one of the bigger complaints about this game as well, is the structuring of the narrative, in particular the placement of the flashbacks throughout the game. And I don't really agree with most of the complaints. I do feel like most of the flashbacks in the game are interspliced at times that do make sense. However, I do feel like this is the one that feels kind of off, not within the actual course of the narrative, but more so from the concept that we've already seen this scene. So for them to be hiding this scene until later in the game just feels kind of weird. Either way, during this section we do learn about the awkwardness between Joel and Ellie, and from the way this chapter portrays their relationship, it does feel like they are already repairing their relationship. Though we do obviously learn later that they never actually got the chance for this, which really just makes obviously the entire events of Jackson just really tragic. We do then meet Dina in the game, who is Ellie's love interest, and I do like her relationship with Ellie. I do find some of the banter between the two to be kind of cringy at points, but for the most part, I think the relationship is well written, despite Dina's character becoming kind of irrelevant after Seattle Take 1. After this, we do get a weird section where we have a snowball fight with some kids for some reason.
Can you walk?
But after that, we do end up leaving Jackson on patrol, and that's when we transition
Okay, just hang on.
Chapter, which
I'll go get the
forces us
truck.
to play as
Take you to the doctor.
for the first time.
Hey.
Which I remember the first time I played the
Make it,
game, it
Sam.
did feel kind of jarring,
Johnny,
especially because
stay
obviously
here
you come
with
into this
him.
game thinking
He's
you're
back.
going to get
He's back in
a
a
game
flash.
pretty much solely with Ellie. And then when you get the revelation that there is this other playable character, especially in a story that is held with such high regard in The Last of Us, obviously there is always going to be some hesitation there, and then obviously what they do with Abby's character later did obviously cause a lot of controversy. But through this Abby section, we do get introduced to Owen, who I find a strange character. I mean, I think he is someone that is probably one of the more developed characters out of Abby's group. And if you were to like really force me to like rank all of Abby's friends, I mean, I guess I would put Owen at number 1. But it's like, that's not really saying much. Like, I don't know, something about Owen, a bad character, he's not poorly written. It's just something about him just always made him feel to me like a plot device for Abby, instead of an actual like compelling character. And through this, we do get tutorials to some of the new mechanics within the game, like dodging and proning, which dodging I don't feel works nearly as well as I would like. I think that was one of my favorite complaints of The Last of Us Part 1 in terms of its combat system and the fact that you can't dodge attacks, and through that you can easily get surrounded. But here with this game, I do feel like the dodging feels unresponsive at points. There's points where I'm pushing dodge and she doesn't do it until a few seconds later, and that can get kind of annoying. Proning, though, I actually really enjoy. I think proning was a nice addition to the game, really helps out with the stealth. Outside of the tutorials and the introduction to Abby and Owen, this chapter doesn't really do much narratively. Despite being like a 10 to 15 minute chapter, it really could have been finished within that one cutscene of Abby and Owen finding Jackson. After that, we do
Turn
back
to really
to
drop
Ellie
in.
and Tina, and we have a pretty long section of Ellie going up patrol. And there's, again, we get more tutorials, specifically with the crafting system and throwing bottles and bricks, and we need to clear out some areas of infected. And through this process, we do get more of the relationship between
I didn't realize there's stairs
There's obviously
here.
the foundation around their romantic relationship, which we do see progress later down the road. After this section, we cut back to Abby in the Horde chapter where she's running away from the Horde. And this is where the narrative really starts to get serious. I mean, this is the chapter where Abby gets saved by Joel and Tommy. And it was nice to see these characters for the first time after a time skip here. As I remember when I was first playing the game, I was really just waiting to see how Joel would introduce the story here. And I think that adds some irony here that Joel ends up saving the person that eventually ends up killing him. But while running away from the infected, we have the scene where Tommy introduces the duo to Abby. And after learning Joel's name, you clearly see Abby looking shocked. And it's
so
at that point
close.
where I remember knowing exactly what was going to happen. So Abby ends up taking Joel and Tommy back to her friends, and this scene is so intense. The music doesn't right here perfectly fits the scene. The way that everyone's faces
They're
just
talking
get
about Joel's
super
death
serious
scene.
at the moment where Joel announces his name gives this scene a really great sense of dread. And obviously we get that Abby reveal where she reveals she has a vendetta against Joel and begins to torture him. And in the next chapter, Ellie ends up catching up to them, where we do have the Joel death scene. Now, obviously there was a lot of controversy when this game came out about Joel dying so early on and the circumstances around it, considering how Joel got himself in that position to begin with. People saying that Joel wouldn't let these random people know his name without testing them first. And I get that sentiment, but I feel like there's enough there to rationalize it. First off, it was Tommy that introduced the duo to Abby, while Joel did seem more reserved right off the bat. Plus also in the years of Joel living in a relatively peaceful society, I'm sure he has softened to some degree as well, but I understand the complaints about it. I also get the complaints that Joel was killed off too early, as again, it does suck that we miss out on having
How is he not
more
dead?
of Joel and Ellie interactions with
What the fuck?
But to be honest, for me personally, I don't actually mind it that much, as I feel like we got what I wanted from those flashback sequences that are through the game that end up keeping me satisfied, while also allowing them to tell this new story that they wanted to tell. However, the complaint that people do have that I personally don't get is the fact that people didn't want Joel to die at all when in this game. Because again, for me, Joel dying was a necessity within the narrative of this game. I mean, I love Joel as a character. I mean, he's up there with some of my favorite characters across all of media. But considering the ending of the first game, I feel like his death as a comeuppance for those events of dooming society to save Ellie was exactly what I needed from this story. I mean, if it didn't happen, I would have been very underwhelmed, as thematically it needed to happen. And the way that this scene is executed is done in the most brutal way possible, with Joel just getting beaten up with a golf club, and the music here is piercing. The moment where Abby hits Joel for the last time is one etched in my head. Plus also the desperation coming from Ashley Johnson's performance is masterfully acted. And also in retrospect, I mean, now knowing where Joel and Ellie left their relationship the previous night, the scene is even more tragic, but also heartwarming at the same time. And tragic in the sense that Joel and Ellie never really got to fully repair their relationship before his death, and that the guilt from that ends up driving Ellie's character moving forward. Also heartwarming in the sense that the last thing that Joel sees is Ellie crying out in desperation for Joel to get up. Essentially a final confirmation that Ellie does still care for him after all the things he's done. And in retrospect, I feel so much more content with this being the ending for Joel's character, despite this not really being a conclusion that you can come to during your first playthrough of the game. And for me, this was one of the most powerful revelations I had on my initial replay. And while Joel doesn't get the conclusion that many people would have wanted for his character, to me, this ending was perfect and exactly what I wanted. Now after seeing we skip forward a bit of time to see Ellie and Tommy talking about going after the
I love how I'm not even through the
that Joel's
prologue.
killers belong to, and Ellie
Like,
wants
to Jackson, and I'm like
tells her
13
not to.
minutes into the
And this is
fucking
again a
video.
great scene, well acted, really makes you feel the weight of Joel's death. But then we get Ellie visiting Joel's grave before planning to sneak out for Jackson to hunt Abby down. But this is where we learn that Tommy has gone on his own to get vengeance without putting the others in danger. And now we have to get to Seattle both to get revenge, but also to help Tommy out. Before we leave, we do walk over to Joel's house, which I might as well mention this here. I did find it kind of funny that if you pay attention, Ellie lives in Joel's garage in his backyard. And it's kind of funny that despite them supposedly not talking for a while and them having a really strained relationship, they still live so close to each other. But whatever, we do eventually get to Joel's room, which has some fun references to the first game. And we end up finding a box that has the watch that Sarah gave him in the first game. And we do also end up taking Joel's revolver before having a discussion with Maria. But this strangely being Maria's final appearance in the game, she doesn't really end up doing that much here, outside of just acting as the leader figure within the Jackson community. But after this, we do end up leaving for Seattle, and that starts Seattle Day 1, which starts with the Gate chapter involving entering the city, and through this we get a lot of fun conversations between Ellie and Dina, some of them having cool callbacks to the original game, and Seattle Day 1 really does focus on the relationship between the two. Again, I am underwhelmed by the fact that Dina disappears for a while afterwards, but something I did find strange about this too is that we do skip weeks worth of their relationship and their interactions with each other on the road to Seattle, which makes the seriousness of their relationship during Day 1 here kind of jarring considering the fact that, like, during Jackson, they were just starting their relationship, but here they're, like, talking as if they've been together for a really long time, despite the fact that it's only been a few weeks. But gameplay-wise, this section is very platforming and puzzle-based, and I will say that the platforming in this game kind of sucks. I mean, it did in the first game as well, but considering there's more of it in this game, it really is noticeable just how poorly it controls. There are times where you want to jump and the game just doesn't jump right away. It just feels super awkward, and sometimes I miss landing on the platform despite me doing the exact same thing I would do at times when it would work. But this does lead to the downtown chapter, which is a semi-open world where Ellie needs to find gas to open the gate to Serafina, a hotel that served as a WLF base. And the downtown chapter can be finished in like 10 to 15 minutes if you rush through it. But if you explore the open world, there is a lot of interesting interactions and things to find within it. There are optional buildings that have some pretty good music. There's an optional cutscene of Ellie singing Take On Me to Dina, and that's a great scene. In many ways, they took the semi-open world element of Uncharted: The Lost Legacy and really expanded upon it here. And I do think they were able to execute it a lot better within this game. But the main story does progress through going to the synagogue and the courthouse. The synagogue is a pretty easy section. There are enemies at the beginning, but you can really just run straight past them, and after you kind of have a really basic puzzle. The courthouse section is a bit more interesting to me, with two pretty big encounters, the one in the parking garage being one of the bigger combat sections in the game. Now, the next few chapters are kind of blended together, as it really just feels like a long trek of tracking down Ellie's targets. First in the hotel, where we find one of the targets having already been killed by Tommy, and immediately after this we get captured by Jordan, another one of Ellie's targets, and we get this really tense scene where we have Adina being captured by Jordan, and then we have to go free ourselves and kill him, and that's a really brutal scene. We then proceed to escape from the elementary school, which is a very finicky combat section, where every time I play this section, I just run through it. However, the button prompt at the end of the section to finish it is really annoying to get to work, and sometimes you get to the end and it just works right away. Sometimes it doesn't work, and you have to go back and try to find Dina and get hurt again, or you have to go back and kill some enemies to get it to work. I mean, it's really kind of an annoying experience there, but overall, this is a fun enemy encounter if you take that element out of it. After this, we get to Capitol Hill, which is essentially our road to the TV station, and this is a pretty big section. Again, not the size of downtown, but it's a pretty large, explorable area, and you can spend a good chunk of time here. Though I will say that I didn't really hate the section with the tripwires. I remember the first time I played the game, I was just continuing dying left and right because I just wasn't paying attention. But the section doesn't directly lead into the TV station, where we see the handiwork of the Seraphites for the first time, and despite all of the setup during Ellie's playthrough for the Seraphites, we don't really interact with them much until Abby's playthrough, which I did find kind of underwhelming. But we do find Ellie's target already dead, but the wolves arrive on our way out, and that leads to us having to escape through the tunnels. And the tunnels chapter is a mixed bag for me. I mean, I personally never cared for dark underground locations in games, and obviously the tunnels here is that, but here we do get our first encounter with both human and infected enemies at once, though I'm to be very one to the end, you'll be fine. But that is another thing that I was kind of underwhelmed by in this game, is the fact that these type of encounters don't happen that often. We also get introduced to the Shamblers, which I never really loved as an archetype. I mean, they just feel like a downgraded version of bloaters, where they're similar size, but they're much easier to kill. I mean, now they do emit poisonous gas, so really at the end of the day, I just find it kind of annoying, and the archetype to me is just kind of lackluster. It's also during this section that we end up telling Dina that Ellie is immune, and I will say that I did find it underwhelming that Ellie's immunity was such a non-factor in this game story, and I feel like it's only mentioned at points where it would just be...
Am I just supposed to be shooting at the top?
It really feels like Ellie's immunity was more of a nuisance to the story than it was actually an important plot point. But then we escape and we end up at the theater, which becomes our hideout for the rest of Ellie's playthrough, and gameplay-wise, this chapter's pretty uneventful. But narratively, we do get an argument between Dina and Ellie, where Dina reveals that she's pregnant, which was foreshadowed earlier in the Capitol Hill chapter, so I wasn't surprised the first time I played it when this was revealed. But Ellie does end up finding a guitar, which ends up reminding her of Joel, and that leads us to the end of day one with the birthday gift chapter, which is a flashback sequence with Ellie, Dan, and Joel, and I love this chapter. Again, this chapter provides the interactions between the two characters that I wanted from this game, but I also don't have a problem with trying to tell the new story.
That's what we're supposed to shoot
For me, I do
directly at
feel
the
like
top.
the game kind of blends the old and new relatively well, though I understand that mix isn't as well respected by other people. But again, this section has a lot of strong character moments. I mean, from Ellie, Ellie putting the hat on top of the funnel, there's a cool banter between the two characters here. We have our first gameplay of Ellie swimming. I mean, there's a lot of great stuff in this chapter, and it's really a great way to end day one. Now for Seattle Day 2, which starts off with the Hillcrest chapter, where Ellie goes on her own to find Tommy, only to find out that it's not Tommy in Hillcrest, it's Jesse that's been hiding out there. And I know a lot of people were upset at how the cutscene from the original reveal date trailer that has Joel tell Ellie, I think I'll let you do this on your own, and like that's a really great scene. Like I love that moment in that trailer. But then we see it in the game and it's actually Jesse that says the line, and it doesn't play nearly as well. Now I'm not upset at how they lied about the story, they said that Joel and Ellie's relationship was going to be the main thing. It's like, I don't care. And for me, it is better to preserve those sort of surprises for when people play the actual game. But this simply just doesn't play well. I just really like Troy Baker's performance of the line a lot better than Jesse's here. Every single time I see this scene, I just compare it to that scene from the trailer, and it just isn't nearly as bad. However, from a gameplay perspective, I think Hill Crest is one of the better made chapters within the game. I mean, the combat sections here are really well designed and utilize some of the new mechanics within the game, like proning and having to avoid guard dogs. It's also just a really fun section to run through. Plus, after you get back together with Jesse, you do have this fun car chase set piece. So, I mean, I do feel like this section ends up being one of my favorite chapters, despite the fact that it doesn't really progress the narrative that much. After we return from Hill Crest, we do get another flashback in Finding Strings. This is probably one of the more questionable flashback placements for me, as at this point, it does kind of feel like we just got a flashback. Why are we getting another one so soon? Plus, also the fact I feel like this one in particular is kind of pointless. Outside the final scene within this chapter, not really much happens within the chapter outside just seeing these two characters interact, which is obviously great, but when also the placement of the chapter feels kind of off, I just question if this section was absolutely necessary. But through this chapter, we do see that it's pretty clear that Ellie is starting to doubt Joel and does act accordingly. The section does start off with a pretty annoying sniper section with Tommy, which technically does set up Tommy's sniping abilities later on in the story, but I still find this section kind of annoying to play through. But it does lead to us traveling with Joel to look for new strings for Ellie's guitar for some reason. And I get that it's further connecting music and the guitar to Joel, which does connect itself later in the story, but was it 100% necessary? Not really. This leads to some infected encounters, including a fight with the floater, and we have this great scene of Joel saving her from it. Though I do find it strange that despite how much you fight it, you have to die from it, essentially. Like, there's no way to actually finish this fight, from what I understand. Essentially, you just have to damage it enough to the point where it charges you, and then the cutscenes and progress continue. So essentially, you actively have to lose this fight after a certain amount of time. And then obviously, the final scene in this chapter is really great, where Ellie does confront Joel. And again, there's some great performances here, both from Ashley Johnson and Troy Baker. And it's here that we get one of the lines from Joel that was in the trailer. That again, people have said, oh my god, they lied in the trailer, they showed him older than when he is here, but it's like, I don't really care. Overall, this is a pretty solid flashback. For me, all of the Ellie flashbacks are pretty good. However, I do feel like this is probably the weakest one of the bunch for me. After this, we do get probably one of the longer chapters in the game, in the Seraphite chapter, where Ellie heads out on her own to take down Nora, and we spend a long time trying to get to the hospital. And I didn't love the stalker sections at the beginning of this chapter. And I might as well mention this now, too, is that I just hate stalkers in general within the game. They're just annoying to deal with, and they make no sense from a narrative standpoint. Like, why is the progression from a runner into a stalker and then a clicker? Like, why did they get more intelligent after being a runner and then less intelligent after becoming a stalker? Like, it makes no sense in my eyes. After that, we do finally interact with the Seraphites, and these can be some fun encounters, though, really, I just haven't run through them. And while I do love the concept of the Seraphites, I don't feel like, again, they're really utilized as much as I would have liked. And this is one of Ellie's only interactions with them throughout the entire game. But we do reach the hospital and have a chase sequence with Nora, and the scene where we kill Nora is pretty brutal, and I think this scene is one that I have a lot more appreciation for now. As at this point in the story, I think you can really tell that Ellie is someone that tries to be this Joel figure in the game. Like, she's trying to do what Joel would do, but that's just not Ellie. Like, it takes everything out of Ellie to just do these acts that Joel would do without a problem. And we see Ellie, like, struggle while killing Nora, and then her immediately puking afterwards, which I do feel like is some strong characterization for Ellie, and also just shows how far gone she really is. Now we can follow that up with another flashback, actually the last Ellie flashback until the end portions of the game, and it returns us to St. Mary's Hospital, the location of the ending of the original Last of Us, where Ellie, wanting to know the truth behind what happened, goes there and learns that Joel has lied to her. And I love this cutscene where she confronts Joel. It really just felt satisfying to me, again, as I felt like Joel needed to pay narratively for what he did at the end of the original game.
Cool.
For him to lose Ellie here, the very thing that he doomed the world to save, was something that felt right. And I will say that I am kind of disappointed that his attempts to win her back aren't really focused on, from this point on, outside of what happened the night before his death. I do wish we got some more context on how their relationship was in the time in between. Like, I do feel like we could have used another flashback to further deepen their conflict, but to be fair, it probably does work out the way it is, but I do think it could have been better. And now we move on to day 3, in which we spend the first chapter here working with Jesse to reach the aquarium where Abby is hiding. And we do get some interesting dialogue from Jesse and also some fine encounters in this chapter, but not much actually happens here narratively outside of Ellie ending up siding with revenge over trying to save Tommy, which leads to her splitting up with Jesse, and we end up
I just skip through day 3, don't I?
On our own. Now here we do get some boat gameplay, which I did enjoy, traversing the flooded streets with the boat here. And we do eventually get a boss battle against a bloater, which I kind of find strange how much the bloaters in this game are kind of held up. As in the original game, yes, there's that big bloater fight in the high school, but outside of that, bloaters are just kind of randomly thrown in the world. But here we do get 2 massive boss battles with bloaters. But overall, this chapter doesn't really do much narratively, again, outside of getting Ellie to the aquarium. And the final chapter, Day 3, involves Ellie navigating around the aquarium to find Owen and Mel, who she does end up killing. And I think this would play a factor in why I don't care about these characters when we do see them in the Abby storyline, as we know that they're going to die. But this does some great characterization for Ellie again, and doing things against her character, all in this quest for vengeance. These actions that Joel would do without issue, but for Ellie it doesn't really match her character, and again it's showing how far she's willing to go to get revenge for Joel. And we then get some great music here, some great sound design with the screeching noise that plays when Ellie finds out that Mel was pregnant, and she finally gets a full grasp on what she's just done. But after this, we do return to the theater, having regrouped with Tommy, and we get this fun banter between Ellie, Tommy, and Jesse. But this is all before everything goes down. I mean, Abby has arrived, kills Jesse. Ellie drops her weapons, and Abby points her gun at her, and we cut to black. And all this is really great. It's a really tense scene. However, I will say that I am disappointed in the fact that Jesse dies so abruptly, which is something that this game does pretty often, which does seem opposed to what the original game would do with characters like Sam and Henry, who got this really long cutscene to show their deaths, and same thing with like Tess, who was given this heroic exit within the game. This game just kind of deals with character deaths as just a way to jump scare the player, which for me doesn't leave as much of an impact at the end of the day. But now we move on to the park, which is a flashback sequence for Abby, and this starts in the Abby section game. And I know a lot of people are upset that, oh, we have to play as Abby, we have to play as Joel's killer. This chapter did get me on board with Abby's character. To be honest, I think now Abby's arc throughout this game for me is much more satisfying than Ellie's. However, I was still upset that we had to play as Abby for as long as we did. I just feel like the pacing of this section is still kind of off. I think in retrospect, I think probably a better way to approach this, which again, like who knows how it actually affects the story, but I think they should have probably tried out doing Ellie Day 1, then Abby Day 1, Ellie Day 2, Abby Day 2, and progress like that instead of having Ellie days 1 through 3, then Abby's days 1 through 3. Because I do think one of the bigger issues is the fact that we end up playing as Abby for so long. The fact that we have to redo days 1, 2, and 3, but this time from Abby's perspective, is a great concept. However, I feel like in execution, when we were just left off of that scene from the theater, it makes it so, especially the first time you're playing this game, you're just
I'm an idiot.
back to
I never started a timer for
while they
something.
do so many great things with Abby's character along the way, I do feel like that detracts from the overall experience. But again, let's talk about the park chapter, which it's comprised of Abby trying to find her dad, and when we do, we rescue the zebra, and this is all fine. I mean, there are some great character moments, but really the standout moment
really matter, that's
chapter
why.
is the reveal that Abby's dad was the doctor that Joel killed at the end of the first game, giving her a personal vendetta against Joel, and I feel like that was the perfect way to handle this. Again, I feel like Joel needed his comeuppance from the events of the original game, and to have the Fireflies from that group, specifically the daughter of the doctor that he directly kills, is a great revelation.
He knocks jacket
Nicely
first.
ties together the two narratives here in a really satisfying way for me. After this, we do obviously get the scene of Abby breaking down after finding her father dead, and this leads to us now understanding the Joel Duck scene better, now knowing the context behind her vendetta. But after that cutscene, we do get a cut to black once again, only to see the words Seattle Day 1 once again. And I remember being annoyed the first time I played it. Again, as I mentioned before, it's like I had to go through 3 more days of content as Abby. Did seem annoying at that point, but I do feel like they do a good job at making Abby a relatable character. The problem is I don't feel like they do that until day 2. For me, days 2 and 3 of Abby's playthrough are some of the more memorable gameplay
It's a pretty long mission,
in
isn't
the
it?
game, and with Abby's arc to boot. I feel like those days
So
are
after this, I think we'll just go until the video is done.
great. And I do find this to still be the worst paced section of the game.
Just about 20 more minutes, so we'll probably go over 30 here. But again, I'm an idiot and I didn't start a timer, so I don't fully know
It really can feel like a slog at points, but once you get to the
how long we've been going.
up again, that's after like a few hours of Abby's playthrough. Now we do start off with the stadium, which is a fine way to start here, where we do spend a lot of time bonding with the character of Manny, who is relatively likable. I mean, him and Owen are the 2 side characters here, giving the most depth, and it is interesting how this really just shows us the other side of the conflict, where in the Joel death scene, Manny just seems like kind of a dick, but here he does turn out to be pretty likable. You also end up spending a lot of time with Mel through this and the on-foot chapter, which is a character that I never particularly liked. And it's weird too, because I feel like the game here in the chapters are really setting up a potential like buddy-buddy relationship between Abby and Mel. There was actually a point in my first playthrough I was thinking, is Mel going to be like the Ellie to Abby's Joel? But then I realized, wait, she dies at the end of game 3, so that's not going to happen. By the time of day 3, their relationship is completely crumbled. So I really do find this section really pointless from a narrative perspective. I really don't get why this is even here. Though the one thing that does help this section is the fact that there are some pretty fun combat sections within. After this, though, we do get to the forward base, which is mostly just walking around and talking to characters, with Nora being shown here before she ends up heading out to the hospital, and here we learn about Owen getting in trouble for killing a fellow wolf, and he's in hiding because of that. Eventually we do end up meeting up with
respects one person in this whole town, and that's you.
Well acted.
This has got to be some kind of misunderstanding.
I've been calling him all day. Very underwhelming, as he should have been this really intimidating villain, but instead he's just this forgettable figure that ends up dying later pretty anticlimactically without doing much within the story. But this does lead to the Aquarium chapter, the next of Abby's flashbacks, this time taking place after she joins the Wolves, and really focuses on her relationship with Owen, which does have some fun banter here and there, but at the end of the day, I do find this section pretty boring. Gameplay-wise, there is a lot of just waiting around and following, and that's just not fun. Again, I get the narrative significance of it, showing why the aquarium is an important location to both of the characters, while also expanding upon Abby's background, but it is just the I shot after he wouldn't let me sink her. After that, we do have the hostile territory chapter that revolves around Abby traveling through Seraphite territory to get to the aquarium, and again, the Seraphites are intimidating antagonists, and there is some interesting level design here, specifically of her traversing around the broken building. But at the end of the day, this section doesn't really do much narratively outside of just having Abby get captured by the Seraphites, in which she gets knocked out, leading us to the next and final Abby flashback in the winter. If he doesn't have them on him, he'll make him tell you where to find them. Flashbacks are so close to each other. I guess, like, where else are you going to put this in the story and have it make sense to the events that are currently happening? I did find this placement here kind of weird, but this chapter does involve Abby visiting Owen, obviously during the winter time, and ends up showing us how Abby knew about Joel's location and shows her getting Owen to agree to join her. Again, it's all fine. It's fine. It's really just a setup for like how the events end up occurring. There are some fun character moments from this chapter, specifically from that target shooting competition, but at the end of the day, this entire section does also feel pretty slow. Then we get to the forest chapter, which is again where the game picks up. Once again, we start off with this incredible cutscene of Abby almost getting hanged by the Seraphites, but she ends up getting saved by Lev and Yara, who have really solid introductions here, with Yara getting her arm broken during this really brutal scene, and it is cool to see this scene within the context of the game, as it's another cutscene that we did see years back in, I believe, 2017. But at the time, we didn't know who Abby was. I mean, I remember the speculation was that, like, Abby was potentially Ellie's mom, though obviously that ended up being wrong. But now seeing this cutscene within the game, it was cool to see how it connects to the overall story. And the gameplay here is interesting as well. I mean, to be honest, I don't love it. It's essentially just melee combat with stalkers, and that's not really great. But it's at least a cool section visually. We then also get a mini-boss against the Seraphite that knocked us out, and I still find this ridiculous that she's still wearing Abby's backpack. And that's how they explain that Abby gets all of her gear back, but it really just comes off as commonplace every single time I hear her say that out loud. But this section does bond us with Lev and Yara, who I like both of them as characters. Obviously, Lev is the main one of the two, and ends up being one of the best characters within the entire game, with his relationship with Abby and how it mirrors that of Joel and Ellie's, plus also having the interesting background of being a former Seraphite. And Yara is fine on her own right, but I would have preferred it if she was used more within the game, as really she's only prominent here in a very minor way, and then also during the first half of day 3, which at the end of the day isn't that much screen time. So Yara's another one of these characters I feel like they could have done more with. After this, we do get a pretty big infected fight here that I really hate. Not because it's poor designed or anything, but just because I don't find it fun. Really, the entire back portion of Abby Day 1 here is placed in very dark, enemy-infested areas, and as I mentioned earlier, not really my thing. But we eventually do split up from Lev and Yara and head to the aquarium on our own, and this leads to more sections that I don't find particularly fun gameplay-wise, though traversing through the ship is a pretty decent set piece, but again, one filled with infected in a very dark area, and I could do without that. But eventually we do reach Owen at the aquarium, and we end the chapter with a sex scene. Yay. After this, we do get to a nightmare sequence with Abby, where she dreams about Lev and Yara, essentially finding a new purpose in life to now protect the duo. So at the start of day 2, we do backtrack a bit to find Lev and Yara where we left them, and I do find it kind of humorous how we just skipped the return to the aquarium. It makes no real sense how she got back, considering the path to the aquarium to begin with was already destroyed. Also, getting back there while also carrying Yara the entire time just seems kind of dumb. But this obviously does set up the adventure that Abby and Lev go on during day 2, which entirely comprises of Abby and Lev heading for the hospital to get medical supplies to amputate Yara's arm, and this leads to a really strong series of chapters here. While mostly filled with dark enemy-infested areas, again, something I don't love, but these sections are great from a narrative perspective in terms of really establishing the bond between Abby and Lev, while also providing some of the best set pieces within the game. We started off with a shortcut that involves
$20.
first getting through some
How
flooded
about
streets
40?
until we reach the
All right,
skyscraper, which
spill.
will be
The
used as a
FBI's in
shortcut.
town.
And while we do have some encounters
Getting
with the
something
Seraphites,
from
the
Morello,
highlight of this
but
chapter is
I
really
don't
Lev
know.
showing us
How'd
the
you
way,
hear?
learning
Little
more about how the
Tony got some
Seraphites
guy drunk
operate,
in the
how they
black
become
cat and
corrupt
drove
over
him
time and been misguided
bunch
by
of stuff,
misrepresenting
so
the ideals
he's
of
the
their
guy you
founder.
see.
We also have this really cool set piece that is a
Thanks.
combat section on top of one of the broken buildings, so that's cool. After this, we do cross the bridge, which again is another really cool set piece that allows for some really great character moments from both Lev and Abby, with Abby for the first time truly feeling vulnerable as a character, because I do feel like she really comes off as relatable here. This chapter ends up starting after Abby and Lev fall off the bridge, and
Okay,
have to
probably
descend
need a
by
car, don't we?
floor by floor, and this is another really great set piece.
Yeah.
Really awesome visually, really awesome level design wise, while again also bringing up great character moments throughout, especially from Lev. I mean, I always love the innocence in Lev's performance here, where he reveals that he doesn't have a mask, leading to Abby having to get one for him, really setting up Abby as the new caretaker for Lev, again mirroring that Joel and Ellie relationship. Really, this section of the game has a lot of elements of things I typically don't like from games, but I do feel like they made it work, and I think I do have a lot of fun playing through this section. Now, after this, we do eventually reach the hospital, and we end up splitting from Lev and attempt to lie to the wolves about Isaac needing these supplies, which is really just a terrible lie. But whatever, she gets caught, and through that is eventually broken out by Nora, who helps us break into Ground Zero, the lower levels of the hospital, where we can find more supplies. But shockingly, of course, it is a dark, enemy-filled area, and it really creeped me out the first time I played it. Now it's fine. I mean, I don't love this section, but I get it from like a set piece sort of standpoint. Obviously, this does also lead up to the Rat King fight, and the Rat King
I looked away for like a second.
really terrifying the first time you play it. But I feel like now, if you just bombard it with bombs and some of the stronger ammo within the game, it really becomes a cakewalk. But still, this is a really great section for Abby's character as well, showing how far she's come, where now she's willing to go through all this hell just to save a Seraphite, which is a group of people that she really hated at the beginning of day one. After getting supplies, we return to the aquarium, which ends day 2 with Yara getting her surgery. And then we start day 3 with a strange scene between Abby and Mel, where Mel just bashes on her to her face, which always felt weird to me considering how they bonded during day 1. Mind you, obviously Abby has slept with Owen since then, but I just feel like the turn in their relationship just comes out of left field. After this, we do spend most of day 3 with Yara bonding with her, despite the fact that she kind of dies abruptly later on in the day. But here, Lev does end up sailing back to the Seraphite Island, and through that, we have to follow suit, leading to the Marina chapter, where we have to get a boat to go out there, and along the way we end up being attacked by a sniper and end up reuniting with Manny. And I didn't love this section from a gameplay perspective. There are definitely points where you just get shot out of nowhere, and that's just kind of annoying. But this is another area that has a pretty anticlimactic death here, and Manny just gets shot out of left field. Yeah, I wish this death was given more gravitas, like deaths in Last of Us Part 1 were. Obviously, I get what they were going for here, and we do end up pushing the sniper over the balcony, and obviously it turns out to be Tommy, with this being what happened right before Tommy ends up meeting back up with Ellie in Ellie's day 3, which was a cool like connecting piece between the two storylines. But we do end up sailing for the island, where we get a lot of Seraphite encounters that, for the most part, can just be ran through, and only that is what I end up doing. But something I did love about this section was the fact that essentially this entire island is a battlefield, where the Seraphites and wolves are essentially having their final battle as all of this is going on. And eventually we do get back together with Lev, who had just had to kill his own mother in self-defense, and after this we leave with Lev and Yara until we get captured by Isaac, and Yara ends up killing him out of nowhere, really, which ends up being pretty anticlimactic. Again, like, Isaac is never really focused on as a serious threat, despite him being in a position to where you would think that he would have been a great antagonist. And while we're here, I might as well talk about how I didn't love that the Seraphites' main leadership is never really involved in the game either. Again, mentioned that the Seraphites are not otherwise in the story, really show up as a different enemy type to combat within the game. But immediately after killing Isaac, Yara is well, which is another pretty good one. I mean, it was definitely necessary for the story. Yara needed to die, rest Lev and Abby's relationship, but kind of makes it to not really matter. Like, obviously it does bond Abby with Lev, and that's really the main point of it, but it's kind of dumb how they go through all this trouble to get supplies to kill Yara just for Yara to and then die here. What's the respectively? That is when Lev lashes out at Abby and Yara, again saying they'll do your equivalent, and Abby's response is so
This is also going fantastic. Oh, fuck off.
in the story in the form of a Seraphite, a person from this profession shows the development of a character over the course of this takeover that really feels like a good redemption arc for her after obviously she killed Joel. After she married over the great sectors of the burning city of Mafia. First time we get there, horseback, and then leaving boss battle with a big Sarah fight guy. I always hate this fight, to be honest. I really just don't like the melee combat in this game. It really doesn't work for me in most scenarios. But eventually we find a road that allows us to return to Aquarium, where we find Owen and Belle dead, and Lev finds Ellie's map that she left behind, leading us back to the present timeline where we left off, breaking to the meter, and replay the scene earlier, but now from Abby's perspective. We're progressing through the scene where we see Tommy save Ellie just from being shot in the head, and this is something that I really do like. He tries to make me think, oh, they killed Tommy, but he ends up surviving.
Oh, I think I accidentally hit left trigger.
In that area to make you think he was dead. It's like, why not just shoot him in the torso or in the leg? Like, obviously they were trying to have this impact of like, oh my god, Abby killed him, but it's like, but he doesn't die. Like, it's dumb. But we then get to the Ellie boss battle that I still find really strange, as obviously this boss battle mirrors the David boss battle from Last of Us Part 1, but in this situation, Ellie is David, and we see Ellie using moves that we would use as playing as her, and it's just all really strange. Play as Abby, this new character, and try to kill the person you thought was going to be the main protagonist coming into the game. And this character that you have a strong connection to from the previous game in the series, it's kind of weird. But this fight is pretty brutal. It ends in a confrontation that really makes Abby seem like she's back to being this ruthless killer that she was earlier in the game. The fact that she almost takes pride in killing Dina after Ellie tells her she's pregnant, which obviously is explained by the fact that, from Abby's perspective, she assumes that Ellie killed Mel in a similar way. But we do end up having Lev stop her. And again, I think this fully
Fuck, I'm tired. I don't know why I'm so tired right now.
Where she ends this cycle of violence. She doesn't need to continuously.
I think my eyes are pretty tired.
People just for them to come back at her, and then people get revenge for her. It's like, we don't need this.
So probably, I don't know if we'll call it a day, but I'll definitely take a break after this episode, I think.
Over the death of her father, that ends up leading to Ellie coming back and killing all of her friends. Which now, if Abby goes and kills
I'm
Ellie,
gonna listen 10 minutes.
there's just gonna be another group that comes back to get revenge over her. It's like she understands this, and I would have been satisfied if this was the ending. Obviously, we would have needed some sort of epilogue scene of some sort, but I do feel like they could have ended the story here with the ending of this cycle of violence. And while I've come to accept the events of Santa Barbara, I still don't truly feel like it was 100% necessary for the story. Again, this ends the cycle of violence that the story revolves around.
Looks like the place.
For Ellie to just go and start that again does feel weird to me, but at the same time, it does show again how far gone Ellie is and how far vengeance and guilt will take a person.
Vengeance clouded my mind when I've been for a few strangers.
I kind of find this section boring, and while it is nice to have some downtime with Ellie being happy for a bit, it does lead to some pretty boring gameplay of just walking around the house and having some interactions with Dina that do show the happy state of their relationship at this point, now taking care of
These facial models are pretty
spending
fucked.
most of this chapter is doing farm-related things, and that's just kind of whatever. But we do eventually find out that Ellie still has PTSD over Joel's death, and when Tommy eventually ends up showing up, again, miraculously not dead, he ends up telling her that he's found where Abby is, and initially Ellie turns him down. And I think this really shows also just how far gone Tommy is.
Take me
as
to
well.
those
Where at
account
this
books,
point,
Frank.
he's already lost everything due to his quest for revenge. He's lost his ability to walk. He's lost his wife. And he's still obsessed over getting Abby. And initially it seems like Ellie is over it, but then we get this flashback to, again, the beginning of the game, the scene from the day before the waking up chapter, where Ellie and Dina have their first kiss, and this is a really well acted scene, but it ends with Joel standing up for Ellie, just for Ellie to get upset at him for doing so. And again, it's so clear that this guilt that Ellie has over their relationship and how she treats Joel really forces her to go after Abby again. And we have this really emotional scene between Ellie and Dina, where essentially Ellie chooses her quest for revenge over the life and the family that she's been able to build, and essentially really shows just how Ellie continuing on this path for vengeance will end up with her losing everything. But this leads us to Santa Barbara, first with an Abby section, the final playable Abby section in the game. And this is really short. It really just has Abby finding where the fireflies are, which is a really great heartwarming scene for Abby's character, where she finally can get the peace that she strives for. And through this section, we also see how her relationship with Lev has progressed to the point where they're essentially a family at this point, and that's really nice to see. But then we head out to meet up with the fireflies, only to be captured by this group that rules over Santa Barbara. And this is the point where we cut to Ellie, and we get our final effective encounter in the game as we progress through Santa Barbara. And really, every time I played this game, I've just ran through the section, never bothered killing any of them. But eventually, Ellie does get captured by the Rattlers, and it uses her immunity to her advantage, getting information from the main Rattler guy. And again, this is like pretty much the only point in the story that Ellie's immunity actually kind of mattering. But even then, like, it just feels like they kind of wrote in there just as a convenience, and it providing a cool moment within the story. Like, really, at the end of the day, they could have written a million other different ways for Ellie to get out of this situation. But here we do have our final human enemy encounter as well, and I mostly just run through this section as well. And I did like how this area is kind of reminiscent of hospital section within the first game, the final enemy encounter in that game, where really all you have to do is get to the final doors. But here we do find out that Abby is on the beach, being left for dead, and we slowly make our way there to where we actually are the ones to end up rescuing Abby and Lev. Being a bit ironic here that through Ellie's quest for vengeance, she ends up saving the life that she came to end. But we do end up getting to the shore where it would have been assassinated there. Have this irony come to pass and Ellie saves Abby and just lets her live. But again, it's her quest for vengeance that causes her to lose everything here. And instead we have her picking a fight with Abby, the final confrontation in the game. That's essentially a fist fight. And gameplay-wise, I hate this section. I don't find the melee combat this game fun. And to have the final fight in the game entirely a melee fight was very underwhelming, though it is extremely brutal. Really, again, exemplifying the rawness of the violence within this game. And Ellie does defeat Abby, who's now malnutrition after months of torture, and Ellie still intends on killing her. And Abby does end up fighting back, biting off some of Ellie's fingers in a really brutal way. But before she ends up killing Abby, she gets this image of Joel in her head. And with this recognition that Abby has now become this Joel figure, taking care of Lev just like Joel did with her, and she ends up letting Abby go. And Abby escapes as Ellie falls to the ground in despair in a really powerful scene. I know a lot of people didn't like that the story kind of means nothing, and the fact that Ellie doesn't even get her revenge after going through all the struggle to do so, but that's not really the point of the story. It's really more so a story about how revenge can consume you, and through that, you end up losing everything. And we see that at the end of the game, where Ellie returns home to find it empty, Tina having left with everything, including JJ, meaning Ellie is now lost her idealistic life. She finds the guitar that Joel gave her all those years ago at the beginning of the story, and again, because of her missing fingers now, she can't even play it, losing not only her ability to play music, but also her last connection to Joel. And we follow this up with the final flashback, a scene between Joel and Ellie right before the beginning of the game, later in the night after the dance. And we have this masterfully acted and written scene where Joel tries to repair their relationship once again, and yeah, it's really beautiful, where it ends with Ellie saying that she doesn't think she can forgive Joel for what he's done, but she would like to try, and you can see how much that means to Joel, and it really feels like a perfect send-off for these characters, now knowing the context behind his death scene. And for me, again, I just really adore what they did with Joel's character within this game. While he isn't in it much and serves the main narrative more so as a plot device than an actual character, I do think this game wraps up the storylines from the original game in a way that I feel extremely satisfied. But then we get to the actual ending itself, where Ellie does find herself with nothing. I mean, she has nothing left in the house, has lost pretty much everything she holds dear. And through that, we end up seeing her leave the house and walk off into the distance, which I don't mind as ambiguous ending here. I mean, obviously it does leave it very open for a potential third installment within the series. Even though, to be honest, again, I'm in a situation here where, like, I don't feel like we need one. I would be content if we never got a Last of Us Part 3. I do feel like they've already told the story they needed to tell here. Mind you, I felt that way after the first game as well. But obviously, if they did end up announcing a sequel, I would definitely be interested in seeing what they do with it. But there we go. I mean, I did not intend on this video being as long as it is here, but that is most of what I have to say about The Last of Us Part 2. I mean, to be honest, I could probably go on a bit longer about certain elements of the story, but the video's already been long enough. And again, this is one of my all-time favorite games. And while I do have more fun with it now than I did when I was on that high immediately after the game's release, I still do adore a lot of what this
Yeah, I think
does.
this is a good spot to end.
Ambitious story that the
We're
game
just gonna end here.
tell. I mean, obviously it's not perfect. It's not the most tight-focused narrative, but it is a narrative told on a scale that we rarely see within the gaming medium. I've mentioned this before, that I think Red Dead 2 and possibly Persona 5 are the only games, like single games, that have attempted to tell a story on this scale. And despite my complaint of a lack of focus here, I actually do think
Well, I mean, at 13 Sentinels now.
and I think that this game has really become the gold standard of how to approach linear single-player experiences. And I do hope that the backlash that this game got doesn't detract developers from attempting to make games in this similar sort of style moving forward. I really feel like The Last of Us Part 2, despite having this really controversial narrative, is a masterclass in how to make a game transcend the medium of a game and really become a piece of art through its thematic messaging, its incredible visuals, its great characterization. Say what you will about The Last of Us Part 2, but I do truly look at this as a beautiful piece of art in a way that I rarely do when looking at the video game medium. But there we go. I mean, those are my thoughts on The Last of Us Part 2. Clearly one of my favorite games in recent history. I'm sure I'll talk about it again at some point down the road, but for now, that's the video. Thank you for watching.
Alright. Well, let's end here. Next episode gives you on. For now, thank you for watching.